On the night of March 31st, 1922, 6 people were found dead in a remote farmhouse in Germany. They were killed in a brutal and horrifying way. The entire village was shocked. How could something so terrifying happen in such a quiet and peaceful place? Among the victims was a 2-year-old child, murdered along with his family. Even today, no one knows who did it or why. This case remains one of the biggest unsolved mysteries in German history. This is the haunting story of the Hinterkaifeck murders. So let's try to understand what really happened that night in the farmhouse. Friday night, March 31st, 1922. Hinterkaifeck was a small and isolated farmstead tucked away in the Bavarian countryside of Germany. Surrounded by dense woods and far removed from the bustling towns, it stood in silence, lonely, almost cut off from the outside world. Life on the farm was simple and routine, but on this night, it would become the stage for one of the most chilling crimes in German history. Inside the farmhouse lived 6 people, each belonging to 3 generations of the same family. At the head was Andreas Gruber, 63 years old, a man known for his stern and sometimes harsh nature. Beside him was his wife Cecilia, aged 72, who had lived her life working hard on the farm. Their widowed daughter, Victoria Gabriel, aged 35, also lived with them along with her 2 young children. Victoria was known in the village as a kind but troubled woman, having faced many hardships. Her daughter, little Cecilia, only 7 years old, was full of innocence and energy, while her baby brother, Joseph, just 2 years old, had only begun his life. To help with the household chores, the family had recently hired a new maid, Maria Baumgartner. March 31st was her very first day of work at Hinterkaifeck. Tragically, it would also be her last. That night, sometime under the cover of darkness, a killer entered the farm, armed not with a gun or a knife, but with a mattock, a heavy farming tool with a sharp blade meant for breaking soil and chopping wood. It was a tool that belonged to the Gruber family, now turned into a weapon of death. One by one, every single member of the household was struck down with unimaginable brutality. The mattock, designed for farm labor, was used to kill with ruthless precision. By the time the night was over, 6 lives spanning 3 generations had been silenced forever. The isolated farm, once filled with the sounds of animals, children's laughter, and the steady rhythm of rural life, now stood in grim silence. Hinterkaifeck was no longer just a farm. It had become the scene of one of the most haunting, unsolved murders in history. April 4th, 1922. The discovery. After several days without any word from the Gruber family, concern began to spread in the small village. Neighbors noticed the farm animals wandering restlessly, the smoke missing from the chimney, and the eerie silence surrounding the usually active household. Finally, on April 4th, 1922, 3 men decided to investigate. Lorenz Schlittenbauer, a neighbor who knew the family well, and his companions, Michael Pöhl and Andreas Schweiger. When they arrived at the Hinterkaifeck farm, the atmosphere immediately felt unsettling. The courtyard was quiet, the main door was locked, and the shutters on the windows were only slightly ajar. No one responded to their knocks or calls. The farm, which should have been full of life, felt abandoned, yet strangely the animals were still fed and watered. Suspicious and worried, the men decided to enter through the barn, which was directly connected to the living quarters of the farmhouse. As they stepped inside, their fears turned into horror. Beneath a pile of hay, they discovered 4 lifeless bodies, stacked one upon another. The patriarch, Andreas Gruber, his wife Cecilia, their daughter Victoria, and young Cecilia, only 7 years old. The gruesome discovery shook them, but they had no choice but to continue searching the house. As they moved into the living area, the nightmare deepened. In one small room, they found the maid, Maria Baumgartner, who had only arrived at the farm the day before the murders. She too had been brutally slain. Then came the most heartbreaking sight of all. In the nursery crib lay little Joseph, Victoria's 2-year-old son, murdered in his sleep. What the 3 men saw was beyond imagination. 6 innocent lives had been taken in cold blood, and the killer, or killers, had vanished without a trace. The discovery left them shaken, but they immediately rushed to alert the mayor of Wangen and the local police. News of the crime spread quickly through the village, leaving the community stunned. Hinterkaifeck, once an ordinary farm, had suddenly become the scene of one of Germany's most most horrifying mass murders. The local police soon arrived at the farmhouse, accompanied by the mayor of Wangan. But right from the very beginning, the investigation was full of mistakes. Instead of protecting the crime scene, the police allowed villagers to wander freely around the farmhouse. Out of shock and curiosity, many people even stepped into the barn and the living quarters, touching doors, windows, and in some cases, even the dead bodies. This destroyed valuable evidence that could have helped identify the killer. Fingerprints were smudged, footprints were trampled over, and objects were moved from their original places. In short, the crime scene quickly turned into chaos. To make things worse, the police never sealed off the area. Days went by with people entering and leaving, and any important clues that might have existed were either lost, contaminated, or completely destroyed. Even the murder weapon, the mattock, wasn't discovered immediately. It was lying somewhere on the property, but nobody noticed it until much later. Meanwhile, as investigators tried to piece things together, rumors began spreading across the village. Many neighbors whispered about how the Gruber family had experienced strange and unsettling events in the weeks before their deaths. Some recalled that the family had reported hearing footsteps in the attic, even though no one was supposed to be up there. Others remembered that Andreas Gruber once told people about finding strange footprints in the snow leading directly into the farm, but never out again. And yet, despite these disturbing signs, the family had stayed in the house. Now, with 6 people brutally murdered, the villagers began to wonder, had these strange warnings been connected to the tragedy, or was it all just coincidence? The lack of a proper investigation left these questions hanging, and the truth slipping further away. Strange happenings before the murders. The Gruber family had employed another maid before Maria Baumgartner. Her name was Crescentia G., and she worked at the farmhouse for less than a year. From the very beginning of her time there, Crescentia felt uneasy. She often told people that she heard strange noises coming from the attic, especially at night. Most disturbing of all were the sounds of footsteps overhead, as if someone was quietly moving around in the darkness. Terrified, she confided in Andreas Gruber about what she had been hearing. Andreas, however, brushed off her concerns. He checked the attic once himself but found nothing unusual. His response to her was dismissive. "It's just your imagination." But for Crescentia, it was not just imagination. She insisted it wasn't only footsteps. She often had the unsettling feeling that someone was secretly watching the family, even when no one else was around. The longer she stayed at Hinterkaifeck, the heavier her fear became. Eventually, the atmosphere inside the farmhouse grew unbearable. After only a short time of service, Crescentia could no longer take it. She packed up and abruptly quit her job, leaving the Gruber household behind. Later, when asked why she left so suddenly, Crescentia didn't hold back her words. She told villagers that there was something deeply wrong with that place. In fact, she went so far as to declare, "That house is haunted." Her chilling statement would only add to the mystery after the murders. Many began to wonder, had Crescentia really sensed the presence of the killer hiding there all along? Or were her fears just the product of a troubled imagination? After Crescentia left the farmhouse, Andreas heard the sound of footsteps at night, like someone in the attic was walking. Andreas carefully stood up, lit an oil lamp, and began to search the house. It was mid-March. A blizzard raged outside. He quietly peeked in on his daughter, Victoria Gabriel. He listened closely several times and heard nothing. Andreas returned to his bed, but sleep didn't come. The footsteps he had heard that night were just the latest in a series of unusual events at the German farmstead. In March of 1922, Andreas began discussing with his neighbors about the odd happenings at Hinterkaifeck. He found a discarded Munich newspaper on the property, an unfamiliar publication that one in the family had never read. 2 keys disappeared. A door lock was broken. The footsteps he had heard had also been heard by the earlier maid, who said and felt like she was constantly being watched. She was convinced the farm was haunted. In the freshly fallen snow, a single line of footprints was discovered leading from the edge of the forest directly to the farm. Strangely, there were no returning tracks, as if whoever had arrived at Hinterkaifeck never left. Neighbors were alarmed. They informed Andreas to contact the police, and most of them said that your family might be in danger. He didn't not believe in ghosts, and was confident he could handle any emergency. Despite his neighbors' concern, Andreas Gruber never notified the police. Now the post-mortem report has arrived, according to the post-mortem examination and crime scene investigation. She was fast asleep, as were the others in the house. In the stable next door, the family's loyal German Spitz dozed on a heap of hay. its steady breathing blending with the soft rustle of cattle shifting in their stalls. The night outside pressed cold against the windows, a sharp gust of wind rattling the panes and slipping thin threads of snow through the cracks in the stable wall. Everything seemed calm, ordinary, nothing to suggest the terror that was about to descend upon Hinterkaifeck. Back indoors, Andreas started at the ladder leading to the attic. The attic upstairs was completely open and accessible by the ladder. This was where the family stored smoked meats and flour. The Gruber family was killed on Friday night, March 31st, 1922. It is believed that the killer lured the family members into the barn one by one before they went to bed. Inside the barn, Andreas, his wife Cecilia, elder Victoria, and young Cecilia were each attacked with a mattock and killed. The elder Cecilia suffered a fractured skull from multiple blows to the head and also showed clear signs of strangulation. Andreas was found with his face covered in dried blood, his flesh torn apart so badly that his cheekbones were protruding. Their daughter Victoria had her skull crushed, and evidence suggested her face had been struck repeatedly with a blunt object. The young Cecilia sustained a broken jaw, with her face and neck marked by numerous slashing wounds. After murdering those in the barn, the killer went into the house and killed the maid, Maria Baumgartner, in her bedroom. Lastly, he went to little Joseph's crib and killed him while he was sleeping. The day after the murders, Saturday, when police later questioned people living near Hinterkaifeck, they learned about strange sightings that took place the next morning. Around 3 a.m., a neighbor passing near the farm spotted two unknown men standing at the edge of the forest. When the men realized they had been seen, they quickly turned away to hide their faces. It felt like they were trying to hide their identity. The postman also arrived later that day. When no one answered, he left the mail and newspaper on the windowsill. He thought it was strange that the family's dog didn't bark to greet him as it usually did. At the same night, another farmer walking by noticed a light inside the house and smoke coming from the chimney, as if someone was preparing food. The neighbor again saw rising from the chimney. During that entire time, he noticed something strange, and he didn't see a single person from the household. The only sounds were those of the farm animals. Puzzled, but assuming the family was busy elsewhere, he finished his work, packed his tools, and left, never realizing that the entire family was already dead inside the farmhouse. These strange highlights suggested that the killer had stayed in the farmhouse for at least 2 to 3 days after the murders, eating, keeping the fire going, and even feeding the animals, or while the bodies lay inside. Additionally, investigators discovered ropes tied to several beams inside the barn. Police theorized that these ropes may have been used by the killer to quickly lower themselves to the ground, in case someone unexpectedly entered the house or barn, providing a swift escape route. Further signs suggested that the perpetrator had been living in the barn. Human waste was found in the hayloft, along with discarded rinds of smoked meat near what appeared to be a makeshift lookout point. Police quickly eliminated burglary as a motive. Although the intruders appeared to have been familiar with the property, they left behind large sums of cash and valuables, taking only enough food and fuel to sustain them over 3.5 days. Meanwhile, the postman continued his daily rounds to the farm, delivering letters and newspapers as usual, noting that the mail was left uncollected. They were obviously determined to kill every last person in the house, including a toddler too young to be a witness. The attacks on adult female family members were particularly savage, suggesting they were targeted. Not even the family dog was spared, although it survived. All the evidence pointed to only one thing: revenge. The crime was personal, committed by someone known to the family. Investigators started taking a closer look at the victims. Over the next few weeks, they uncovered family secrets almost as shocking and bizarre as the crime itself. When Andreas Gruber met Cecilia in 1886, he was a 28-year-old bachelor, while she was a 37-year-old widow left with 2 children and the farm of her late husband, Joseph Assam von Hinterkaifeck. To outsiders, the match seemed practical, even perfect. For many neighbors, when the brutal murders came in March 1922, it seemed less like a mystery and more like a grim reckoning, divine punishment for sins against nature. After learning about the troubled history of the Gruber family, the police began looking for people who might have had a reason to commit the crime. They believed the murders were not done by chance, but by someone who knew the family or had a personal issue with them. With this thought, the investigators made a list of suspects, people connected to the Grubers through anger, jealousy, or past conflicts. Maria Baumgartner, the last maid of Hinterkaifeck. Maria came from the nearby village of Grobern. She was single and lived with her sister before moving to Hinterkaifeck. She suffered from a physical disability. One of her legs was shorter than the other, which caused her difficulty in walking. Because of this, she didn't marry and instead worked as a maid to support herself. Maria had just been hired by the Gruber family to replace their previous maid, Crescentia G., who had left because of the strange noises and eerie feelings in the house. On March 31st, 1922, the very same day of the murders, Maria arrived at the farmhouse with her sister. Her sister dropped her off, completely unaware it would be the last time she saw Maria alive. Maria hadn't even finished unpacking her belongings when the crime occurred. She was attacked and killed in her bedroom on the ground floor. Reports say the killer struck her with the mattock while she was lying in bed. When the bodies were discovered, Maria's sister was devastated. She later told investigators that Maria had been hesitant to take the job at Hinterkaifeck, but felt she couldn't refuse because she needed the money. Maria's tragic death makes the case even sadder. She had no direct connection to the family's disputes or dark secrets, yet she was caught in the nightmare simply because she happened to start working there on the wrong day. According to police investigation, these were the suspects for the murders. Suspect 1. Carl Gabriel. Victoria's husband, Carl Gabriel, was officially reported killed in action during World War I. His body, however, was never recovered, which left room for endless speculation. After the war, several people claimed they had seen him, or at least someone who looked strikingly like him, alive and moving about. One story suggested that Carl even returned briefly to Hinterkaifeck, only to leave again after discovering that Victoria was pregnant. If true, it could mean he had a motive to seek revenge. After all, the thought of his wife involved in an incestuous relationship with her father would have been unbearable. Still, not everyone believed these rumors. Fellow soldiers who fought beside Carl insisted they had seen his body on the battlefield at Arras in 1914. With no solid evidence to support the claims of his survival, investigators officially ruled him out as a suspect by December 1923. Suspect 2, Lorenz Schlittenbauer. Several years after the death of Victoria's husband, she began a secret relationship with Lorenz Schlittenbauer, a 48-year-old widower who lived just a mile away from Hinterkaifeck. Their romance quickly became serious, and Victoria soon became pregnant. Believing himself to be the father, Lorenz proposed marriage, but Andreas Gruber would not allow it. He forbade Victoria from remarrying, regardless of the scandal, and seemed unconcerned that people believed Joseph was his own child. Reluctantly, Victoria ended her relationship with Lorenz, leaving the baby's true paternity uncertain. Though Lorenz later remarried, resentment toward the Gruber family never fully left him. He was among the neighbors who first discovered the crime scene, and unusually, he entered locked rooms with a key, strangely similar to one Andreas had previously reported missing. Witnesses also claimed he shouted, "Where is my son, Joseph?" while standing among the dead. Suspicion followed Lorenz for years. He openly admitted his bitterness toward the Grubers, which only fueled the rumors. Still, no evidence ever tied him directly to the murders. He eventually sued his accusers for slander and won. Until his death in 1941, Lorenz Schlittenbauer maintained his innocence. Another set of suspects in the Hinterkaifeck case were the Gump brothers, Carl and Anton. For many years, their names were never connected to the crime, but decades later, something came to light that made investigators take a closer look. In 1951, nearly 30 years after the murders, a woman named Therese T., who was the sister of Carl and Anton, made a shocking confession. On her deathbed, she told a priest that her brothers were responsible for the Hinterkaifeck murders. She claimed they had spoken about the killings and hinted at their guilt. This was enough to alarm the authorities. By then, Carl was already dead, but Anton was still alive. The police arrested him and questioned him about the massacre. Anton already had a reputation in the area. People said the Gump brothers could be violent and unpredictable. That made the accusation seem even more believable. Was this finally the long-awaited answer? Has the mystery been solved? But once again, the investigation hit a wall. There was no physical evidence linking Anton to the farmhouse. There were no surviving witnesses who could place him at the crime scene. Even the supposed confession from his sister was considered hearsay, a story told too late, with no way to prove it. After a short time in custody, Anton was released. The case returned to the same dead end it had been stuck in for decades. In the end, the suspicion against the Gump brothers became just another theory in a sea of unanswered questions. Their names remain attached to the story of Hinterkaifeck, but like so many other suspects, no proof ever surfaced. And so, the murders remained unsolved, the true identity of the killer still hidden in the shadows of history.